Hello folks, I'm Eddie Tucker. This may be just another candy bar to you, but in the 1930s during the Depression, the success of this candy bar and other Mars bars was especially sweet here in Giles County. The Milky Way bar was introduced in 1923 in Minneapolis by Frank Mars, who was a candy broker, then a candy manufacturer. The company moved to Chicago, and the Milky Way bar became the nation's #1 seller. In the fall of 1930, Frank Mars came to Giles County to establish the Milky Way Farm. This is our 50-cent tour of the Milky Way Farm then and now. The 2,800-acre farm included the nation's #1 winning Hereford herd, the breeding, development, and racing of thoroughbred horses, which include a Kentucky Derby winner. They had world champion show mules, a commercial dairy was operated on the farm, and Hampshire sheep were raised here on the farm. Johnny Phelps is the author of 2 books on the Milky Way farms, as later there was a second farm in Arizona. Phelps showed us where it all began for those hired to work on the farm.
This area where we're standing here is where Frank Mars, he had a horse named Bad News, and he thought he was James Cagney. This was his Hollywood hero, and if you've seen the pictures of him, he dressed like James Cagney, and even had the horse named Bad News, which James Cagney's horse was. And then this area, he would ride up here, and the men, which he had 935 at one time hired, but he'd hire them like 100 at a time. And they would come in this area here, this road along here, and back in this area right here, of course the magnolia trees were real small at this time, and they would stand below him, and of course everybody wanted a job even at 50 cents a day. This was during the Depression time, and he would just pick him out some. If you were lucky enough, you would be one of the 100 possibly that he would nod, and they would in turn go to the office in here and be hired. And of course it was 50 cents a day, and as I said, that didn't seem like much at that time, but there were other perks that Frank Mars did for Giles County and the men, and in other words, he would give them all the Milky Way candy bars they wanted to eat. And a lot of times he would furnish housing for them, but one time there were 60 houses along for housing, and other, to give them beef on the weekends and hog, and there were so many other things that he did for his men. But this is where it all started, and he hired them for just common labor, such as raking every rock over 3,000 acres and picking up, doing all the brush, grubbing all the stumps, and there were various areas that he hired these different men in. And as I said, he would also fire you just as quick as he'd hire you. And I said the men, because the men used to look up, and there would be several working in this area and working on the clubhouse. This was the second clubhouse. The first one burned, and my granddad, Weekly Phelps, who I dedicated the book, was one of the foremen working on the clubhouse. And the men would be around here, and they'd see him coming down the road, riding Bad News, and he'd be coming from the hills and everything. He'd have 5 or 6 men with him. And the guys around said, "Oh, here comes Mr. Mars riding Bad News." He said, "That's Bad News." So he'd bring them up here, and he'd fire them. I don't know what he'd catch them doing or whatever, but his daughter, Patty, who everyone loved, they'd walk off and they'd fire them. She'd walk off behind him. She said, "Well, Dad, you don't want to do that. These men don't have blah, blah, blah." So he'd say, turn around, walk off. He said, "Okay, we'll give you one more chance." One guy he fired here 10 different times and hired him back the same day.
Sam Collins III, whose father, Sam Collins Jr., was the last office manager of the farm, he explained the significance of the Milky Way Farm to Giles County.
Milky Way Farm meant a great deal to Giles County, particularly at that time in history. During the Depression, the people in Giles County were very fortunate to have anyone come in like the Mars family and put in an enterprise like they had at Milky Way, because people were begging for work, and he hired many, many people in Giles County.
Henry Davis worked on the farm.
Well, it meant a whole lot to Giles County. Giles County just about to go under, and the bank, it wasn't but one bank open, and his about to go under, and all the places that Mr. Mars bought was mortgaged up. He didn't buy one place up there as paper. And it was a great thing back then.
Although Frank Mars was quick to fire a worker, he obviously had a soft spot in his heart for children. When Giles County General Sessions Judge Bobby Lee was around 10 years old, he lived about 4 miles from the farm. That summer, he and his friend DeLacy Abernathy would ride around the farm on their ponies with Frank Mars. The first time they met Mr. Mars, he had promised the boys all the candy they wanted for opening the gates for him. After riding with him for around 3 hours that day, it was time for the boys to collect their candy.
Weather had gotten hot, and he invited us in, and on this big long table, almost as long as this room is wide, he said, "Help yourself, boys." Well, there was candy piled up, just all sorts of candy, Mars bars and Snickers and Milky Ways and the almond bar, and we were in hog heaven. So he said, "Just help yourself." So we put it in our shirts and we put it in our pockets, and as we had all the space taken up, he said, "You sure you got enough now? You can get some more if you want it." So they told him, no, we had plenty. Well, we got on our ponies, and by the time we had ridden about a mile, of course, chocolate was running down our legs. We were the biggest mess you ever saw in your life. We finally took our shirts off and just put what was left of the bulk of oozing chocolate in her shirt and just held it out like this and rode on down to DeLacy's. Of course, we had to go to the creek and take a bath to get the chocolate off of us. We didn't get much out of that.
Bill Marks, who worked on the farm from 1932 to 1941, saw many children being given candy by Mr. Mars.
He'd have that candy shipped down here from Chicago, and them people had children. He just give it away. He'd give it to anybody, but he wanted to take care of them children.
Mars not only gave away candy, but clothes to his workers, according to Dewey Carville, who started working on the Milky Way farm in the spring of 1930.
Give away clothes. He told me to be up there with a bunch, and he'd buy these striped overalls and blue hickory shirts. And in his clubhouse, he had a balcony, and he'd walk out on that balcony, and the hands that worked in the house and throw them clothes out, and you just grab whatever you could grab. If they got two or three numbers too big, it was up to you to swap out. You just had to swap out.
Tommy Gordon, who worked on the farm from 1932 to 1940, explained how Frank Mars provided meat for his employees.
Well, of course, Mr. Sam Burgess was the butcher out there, and he had a crew of people that helped him, and of course we had all kinds of beautiful cattle, and they'd get those beef cattle up to 1,500 to 1,600 pounds, and they would just slaughter wholesale 10 or 15 at the time, and had hogs too that ran behind the cattle, and they would butcher a lot of hogs. And every Saturday afternoon that every employee just went by the commissary and picked up a sack of meat, and it was kind of like these stores have a grab bag thing. You didn't know what you were getting, and some of us got hams and some of us got a hog head, a feet, or whatever. And I believe, as I was telling you a few minutes ago, that one man drew so many hog heads out there that his nickname was Hoghead, and he had to make a lot of sauce, you know.
One interesting aspect of the farm was that it had its own men's basketball team, comprised of workers on the farm. Sam Collins Jr. organized the team and worked out an agreement for the team to play along with Martin College's girls team. Tommy Gordon played on the Milky Way basketball team.
I guess through Sam's connection with Martin College or something. Back in those days, at that time, Martin College just had a girls' basketball team. It was not co-ed even at that time. It was just all girls. And he worked a deal with Martin to where that we could play the second game along with them, and it would be more attractive to crowds and all that. And so wherever Martin mostly played, we played, and we played the home games up here, and we played schools like Union University over at Jackson, and Salant and Slant here at Lawrenceburg, and Freed Hardeman over at Henderson, Tennessee, and played some Nashville teams and Fayetteville teams, and we were in a fast league.
Frank Mars lived just a few years on the farm, as he passed away at the age of 50 from heart and kidney ailments April 8th of 1934. He was buried in the mausoleum on the farm. Later, his body was moved to Minneapolis by his wife Ethel. Ethel continued to run the Milky Way farm, and she established the racing horse end of it after Frank Mars' death. One of the biggest days on the farm was the day the Milky Way's Galahadian won the Kentucky Derby on May 4th, 1940. Perhaps the greatest hush in all of Kentucky Derby history fell over Churchill Downs that day, as the heavily favored Benelink was defeated, with Galahadian pulling away to his victory of almost 2 lengths. Bill Marks was working on the farm the day Galahadian won the Kentucky Derby.
I was on the farm. I'll tell you what I was doing. I was unloading hay that evening. And the boy, Mr. Garland Smith, he was superintendent out there. And he come down to the barn where we was. Say, well, says Miss Ma's gonna have a Derby winner. And we just got to shouting and going on. Yes, sir. The old Galahadian.
This is the half-a-mile racetrack that's located on the entrance to the Milky Way farm, and this is where some of the famous thoroughbred race horses practiced and trained. And one of them was Forever Yours, which was later a candy bar. I don't know whether you remember Forever Yours candy bar, but this is a case where the candy bar was named after the horse. And I'm not sure that Mars Corporation still has a Forever Yours, but at one time I have eaten a Forever Yours.
How was it?
It was great. Great. Kind of tastes like the Milky Way bar. But of course, this is where the Kentucky Derby winner, Galahadian, practiced and trained in this very area right here, and in 1940 won the Kentucky Derby.
Johnny Phelps took us around the farm as it is today to look at the barns and buildings on the Milky Way farm. Johnny, where are we right now?
Well, this is located beyond I'd say 300 yards below the clubhouse itself, and this is Frank Mars' pet barns. This is where that he would bring his house guests from Chicago or all over the nation and show the best of his 5 livestock operations. Now, in these 5 operations, he had the hog area, he had the sheep area, which we'll go to shortly. He had the livestock, which is his show cattle, and he had the mules, which even before Columbia had Mule Day, this farm had the #1 mules, the #1 show cattle, the #1 beef cattle, the #1 dairy. Dairy was the other one. They were #1 in every livestock operations in the United States of America, not just Tennessee, but the whole nation. And these were where he kept just to show. These areas up here, there's a barn up there for the cattle. This is the barn for the horses and the mules. This is mainly the mule barn here. And on down to the beef, to his bull area, which he was very proud of. This was not the operation for all 5. This is where he bought some just to show his guests where, if they were coming down from the clubhouse, from the swimming pool party or something, he could go down here and say, this one is this is our pride sheep, this is our pride bull, Domino 50 or whatever. And if he wanted to carry them to the other areas, which we're going to shortly, he would go to what we call Bull Holler and the Crooked Sheep Barn, which was in the Guinness Books of Record, and things of this nature. But this was close to home, and this is where he would show them. And we could walk in and see this area, because all of the barns, that area was painted in a green and white format, which was the color of the Milky Way candy bar. And every building on this farm had a green roof, and you can still see some of the faded green up there up to top of the windows and so forth. But everything was green and white, which was Milky Way candy bar. Now, if you'll notice in these areas here, of course, the barns, or you can see that they've torn over the age since 1930, when they were built in 1930. But as we can see, these mules and the horses that were in here, the work horses, all had their little individual home. And as we can see here, that wasn't a bad place to be. And The area back here, I would say there would be about 10 in here, but there would be, out of the 935 people that were on the farm, some were assigned just to this barn. This was to take care of the mules or whatever was in this barn at that time. That's the only job that they had. And maybe there would be as many as 5 or 6 to feed, to care for whatever was in this barn, and that was all the way from taking care of the lawn and whatever needed to be done. This was their barn. And a lot of times, if they came down here and people were not doing their job, this is why they got to meet bad news up there in the office and get fired. Well, this was used as a two-fold area. At one time, maybe some of the, as I talked about the 5 barns, which is located right here, either their night watchman or somebody close to the area would live in this house, and it later become a lounge area, which is kind of like a lounge at any other club organization or something. As you can see here, there's still some part of a couch that was left here. The fireplace, and of course the bath is back there. So this was mainly probably as a night watchman area, or at one time was used maybe as a person that made sure that people didn't come and break in and everything. If you notice that the barns out there all had bars, looks like kind of like a jail and everything. Since this was at a Depression time, people did have a tendency, because this is one of the few places that had feed and corn and so forth that would come in and break in these areas, and this person that lived here would probably oversee that and stay here like 24 hours a day.
Now, you were telling me that everything that was built here was used from products,
right,
the rock and so forth.
Right. There's an area over there called Limestone Holler, which was where all of the bulls were kept. And this area over here, and I've got pictures, and I'll show you those later, of people actually digging. And their job was to dig the limestone out, and for the clubhouse, which was built out of the limestone there. In every building here that was, for example, this one, you can see the limestone all the way through here, that all of the rocks were picked up or gotten out of the limestone area over there, which is located on the back of the farm. So yes, everything here came from this farm. And that was one of Frank Mars's original ideas. This was going to be his home. And this, Giles County, he was coming here to stay probably, forever. We don't know what happened the 4 years that he was here. If he lived longer, this is just hard to really know what would have happened. But he wanted to get everything here. Didn't want to ship anything from Chicago that didn't have to be. And even if he couldn't get it in Giles County, he went to the neighbors in Lawrence and Lincoln and Marshall and other areas, even to the lower Alabama, and to buy his feed and everything. Just as close as he could get it here, he got it here. He didn't want to go any further than this mid-state and lower northern Alabama. This building here, of course, is located still in the 5 barn area, which was the show area, and this is where that a lot of the cattle from all of the operations were bought or sold. And this little building right here is, I guess, is where you carried them just to say, hey, this is where we go to talk money. And this area here, of course, it had the green Milky Way awning over that, and it coming into here, and the room itself is just magnificent with the carpentership and the room, and it's still, after 64 years since this building was here, you can see by the ceiling and the walls and the floor, all are hardwood. All, from every angle, everything in here is solid wood, from the floor to all of the windows. And notice the little window up here in the top area right here. And this is where they would come in, and of course it was furnished really neat in that aspect. And they'd close the door, and a lot of the deals are made on the $50,000 and $60,000 livestock operations. And this is where the money changed hands, or this is where they talked about changing hands with the money. You notice one of the 5 barns that were built here, and if you'll notice the windows, and this is one of Frank Mars's, I guess, loves, was the windows. And most people didn't even have any kind of window. It was unheard of to put a window in a barn. And if you'll notice, just in this particular barn, which is the Mew barn area, just to look at the windows, they're all the way down here and all the way, then they go all the way around the building, and just the windows alone was as I said, one of his. He wanted lights on everything that he did, and this is one of them here. So after Frank Morris died in 1934, his wife Ethel was a big fond lover of racehorsing. Frank Morris himself never got into the racehorse business. This is his wife after his death in 1934. And this barn in this area right here, after she got into racing, was where she put some of her racehorses. And this is where the Kentucky Derby winner Gladahadian stayed before he went to Kentucky in 1940 and won the Kentucky Derby. The home located that you're looking at now is what they call the foreman's homes. This is the persons that were in charge of a particular area on the farm, either the carpenter or the builders or the livestock or some part of the phase of the farm. And they lived in the houses along the top of the knoll, which is located right down below the clubhouse itself. And these homes were furnished free of charge to the foremans of the farm that ran the farm. Building here, located still in the area, maybe 500-600 yards from the clubhouse itself and where the business operation. This was a commissary area, and below this, which we'll go in and look in just a minute, is some grain storage where that they would bring in the grains, such as the cornmeal and things that they distributed to the men or sold in the store. Most of the time it was gifts from the store, but there would be some things that they did sell. And this area was more of a grain type situation where that, which you can see that they back up here with the grain and the cornmeal and the flour, and more of a grain type commissary, which is related to the others over there, which would be the meat and where they'd have the meat and the other grocery staples. And we look inside, you can see look down, you'll see the grain areas where they did store the flour and the meal, and which were all supposed to be waterproof and rat-proof. This area here is below the commissary and the grain area, and up to the right up here was one of the, even before they started having the Tennessee walking horses and the celebrations in Cablevision and so forth, even though Frank Morris wasn't into the walking horse aspect of his livestock, he did have some of the top walkers in the nation. Again, it was part of it, and this was the area that some of those Tennessee walkers were housed. And we'll go into this barn, and as you can see, most people's homes, well, a lot of people's homes in the 30s wasn't as elaborate as this barn. As we had talked about, Frank Morris doing a lot of firing and hiring. I can relate a story as we were walking down the hill there. One time, one of his bulls, prize bulls, was Domino, and we'll get into that when we get over the hill there. But one of the particular workers here's job, the only job he had for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, was to bring water to the bull. And when Frank Morris would ride down on his horse, bad news, he come up to the guy, and the bucket was half full, which I'm sure the bull wasn't going to starve before he got. But Frank Morris did look at him and ask him, say, why is the bucket not full? We're paying you 10 hours a day, surely the good. Well, the guy was trying to explain to him that the bull had just got through drinking the water. But the mistake he made was he was sitting down and not going back to get the water and bringing it back up there immediately. So he fired him. But he hired him back. This barn, as you can see here, this is one of the chandeliers. As a matter of fact, this is the only one that's still here. Now, if you'll notice, there's some chains above in the top of the barn there, where there's some particular light bulbs now. But there's a chain here. There were 4 chandeliers, like the one down on the copper chandelier down at the end. And this is the area. Before, this barn was built before the Tennessee Walkers and before the racing era, but as you can see by looking at these individual stalls, and it would either be a prize mule area or a prize Tennessee Walker But this was the main barn for the Tennessee Walker, or the walking horse, and this area right here was before even Shelbyville or the Tennessee walking industry got really, really big. And again, Frank Morris is one of the people that brought Tennessee walking horses to Middle Tennessee. This is the front entrance of one of their barns here, one of the horse barns or mule barns, but this area where we had just looked to the inside, this is the front entrance. And if you'll just notice the workmanship, again, the rocks and the limestone rock came from the farm. And if these, I mean, it's just magnificent with the screen doors even back then. Now we're talking about a barn here. And then going in this area right here, where the front entrance there, this is where the caretaker of this particular barn lived. And he lived with the horses, he and his family. And there's about a 3 or 4 bedroom, a room apartment there inside the barn where at any particular time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, he would be on call for the horses that were in there. Again, walking around the barns and around the other areas, this is one of the hay barns. Of course, he had many because there was a lot of feeding to be done with that many head of livestock. And this is one of the hay barns. If you'll notice up at the top of the barn, where some of the hay, of course, was put in the loft, there's the Mars emblem. If you can see, can you make the M out on top of the barn up there? The green on the side area there, and it shows an M. The way the woodwork comes around,
Sure can,
and makes the M. And this is he did this on many of his barns that he was able to do it. And this is one of the hay barns.
This is the infamous Hampshire sheep barn, built north and south on a hill at the Milky Way farm. The barn was unique in that you could stand on one end and not be able to see the other end. This is what's left of the Hampshire sheep barn. The sheep barn was built on the lay of the land, giving it its unique design. Frank Mars came to this site with his top foremen and engineers when he decided to get into his 4th livestock operation, Hampshire sheep.
He looked and did the area and decided this is where he wanted to build his barn. Of course, the engineers looked at this site, which is probably one of the worst places to build a sheep barn, or one of the worst places to build any kind of barn. And they started explaining to him what you had to do to get the ground level and to bring in this and bring in that. And his idea was, we're not bringing anything, we're building it just like it is, and we're going across the hill, we're not disturbing any of the ground. So the barn, which as I said is in Ripley's, believe it or not, starts here and goes around all the way to the top of the barn, top of the knoll on the hill here, and goes across and comes out here. Now if you'll look, while you're looking at this barn, probably about 50 yards down the hill here was a cattle barn, which meant in the water, if you'll see the watering trough between the cattle barn, which we had a lot of his show cattle in this area, and the sheep here, which were about 50 to 100 yards from each other, and the water, which both drink from. And regardless of what a lot of the old Westerners thought, that sheep and cattle could not live together and graze on their own land and their own grass, Frank Mars also proved that the Western myth was not true. And with the Hampshire sheep here, the water for both there, and the cattle barn there, they did indeed live in harmony. All right, we're standing now in one of the entrance to the Hampshire sheep barn, which is, as you can see, the roof has already fell in here. But if you'll notice the rock here, the rock that was used to build this barn came from this hill. This area right here that they came in and picked them out of the ditches and into the areas right here, and you'll see that the rock are just some of the many rocks that they hand raked, picked, brought up here, and As I said before, Frank Mars believed in the land serving his purpose of everything going back into his buildings. And as you can see here that the different size rocks that were made to build this world-famous sheep barn. Another interesting tale here is that at one time they had a storm to come up, and many of the sheep in this area right here were trapped in this barn. And then some of the men and Frank Mars rode up to this area right here himself and opened some of these gates to get the sheep out of the barn before a part of the roof did fall in. Mars came up in the storm himself and saved many of the sheep from getting killed before the roof fell in. If you'll notice that this particular angle here, that the wall itself, which is probably about 8 foot tall, this is one continuous wall, one building on the roof that started and made the U shape across at the crest here and went all the way down to the crest of the hill on the other side. So it's approximately 2 football fields long. This is one of the water troughs that as you'll notice, of course, there's no water up here and no water available for the cattle barn on the left and the sheep barn on the right. And this is another unique thing about the Milky Way farm, is their water system and their electrical system. Now this area right here, which was an area that furnished water for both barns, the pump at the end, you'll see, which was some electricity that would pump this water up from a system down below here, a spring system here, pump it all the way up this hill about 500 yards into this area right here, and furnish water for the cattle and the sheep. And as I stated before, this farm is so unique that it had one of the first underground water system, which was an irrigation system. It had the first underground electrical system in the South. And there were so many things that, as we stand up on one of these horizons here and look, it's just hard to visualize the impact that Frank Mars not only had on Giles County and Tennessee and the Mid-South, but the whole U.S. And his ideas and his beliefs were just ahead of his time.
This is the mausoleum where Frank Mars was buried and where Galahadian is buried to this day. 1934, the day Frank Mars died.
It was a sad day in Giles County and a sad day in the nation when Frank Mars died, because Frank Mars did more than any other Giles Countyan to pull Giles County out of the depth of the Depression. And he worked 935 people. Not only did he give these people jobs and take care of their family with the 70+ houses which are located on this 2,805 acre farm. There were commissaries that he furnished them food. And for example, the business people in Giles County were indebted to Frank Mars. The Sharp Motor Company, I know that Bill Murray had told me a story, and Preston Murray had told me a story about Frank Mars coming in and buying a fleet of Ford cars and just say, I'll take them all. And his only color was black. And I know there's an interesting story that one of the Dr. Peters, his veterinarian that he had gotten out of Chicago, the veterinarian, he got Dr. Peters out and he says, Doctor, I want you to go south with me. I'm going to give you a job. Well, Dr. Peters had just gotten out of a vet school. And he came down, brought him down here, and of course Dr. Peters had never been to Giles County, never been to Tennessee, never heard of it. And he brought him down here, and Frank Mars brought him down to, they all had their own railroad station here, which we had D-Ray Station. Brought him in and pointed him up through there, and he says, do you drive? And Dr. Peters, with the understanding that he meant a horse and buggy, he said, of course. And he pointed to the hill, and he says, we'll go up there and pick you out a ride. And Dr. Peters, which I had talked with before his death on this very subject, Dr. Peters went up to the big long barn and opened the doors, expecting to get his horse, to get ready for the horse and buggy days, and there were 50 automobiles, all the same color. So things like this that Frank Mars, everything was first class with him. Everything was the best, and he took so much pride in everything that he did. And the people in the surrounding counties, like Lincoln County, Marshall, Lawrence, as I said, he would buy hay from them. The farmers, when they were in bad need of a person to buy it, a supplier, he would go and buy their hay, buy their grain, and do things, because he had 20,000 cattle he had to feed. And of course, he didn't raise all the feed here for them, and he bought it. And so he helped them. On a personal note that I know with my granddad, Weekly Phelps, who was one of the foremen who had a 5th grade education, and one of the barns that we'll be going into was the famous winding staircase and the chandeliers. And he had bought in his engineers from Chicago and walked them down there and asked them, do we have anybody? And said, I tell you what I want a winding staircase show barn. And the engineers looked at each other and said it couldn't be done. And he asked his foreman, the general foreman, he said, do we not have anybody here that can build one of the horse barns? Weekly Phelps says he can do it. So he brought my granddad over and set him down, and he says, Weekly Phelps, can you do this? He said, yes. And he said, well, just use these men any way you want to use them. Talking about his engineers. He said, the only thing I want to see is them packing their bags and going back to Chicago.
This is an amazing barn we're looking at here. Johnny, what can you tell us about this one?
Well, this is one of the where they kept some of their show cattle. As I said before, they had 20,000 Hereford feeder cattle, and this is where they kept some of their show cattle. And this barn is, as we come in here, the offices on each side, and this is where they would sell them. Bring them into the various stalls, and as you can see by looking up and down, we're in the center of this barn now. If you could just put the camera on the north end and come all the way to the south end. This is just an idea of the magnitude and the size of this one of these barns. It's still barely standing, and this is where some of the many show cattle were brought before they were shipped west, north, and east to go in the various shows. This is one of the 5 feeder barns that was located on the farm, and this is one of the 10 barns that's still standing, and one of them is still in use. I'm not sure who. There were as many as 20,000. If you'll overlook this area, which Richland Creek swings down in there, and those 5 barns were located in this area. At one time, there was as many as 20,000 feeder calves that were bought in this area to be fattened up for market. This is another one of the barns that's still used today, and of course there's a little bit of change in it. It's now used for a horse training, Tennessee walk training horse area, but it would bring the buyers and bring the people in this showroom area right here and show the different cattle and the different bulls and so forth in this area right here, and the buyers would get to look at them, walk around in the circle, and purchase them. Some of the most expensive bulls in the world were in this area here.
I am Joanne Gumnick, and I own this fine place.
Joanne, this place has a lot of history behind it.
It sure has.
Why don't you show us around?
Okay, come on in.
All right.
We're in the process of rebuilding after a fire, and we're not done yet, but we're getting there.
Tell us about the fire.
Well, it happened 4.5 years ago, right after Labor Day, and it wiped us out.
Oh.
And my husband,
what was all in here during the fire?
Well, it was my home, my new car, my truck, my husband's tractor that he had just gotten back from being repaired, and 3 stallions. which we lost in the fire. And it's kind of hard to start over, but we're doing it. And we elected to only put in 10 stalls. There used to be 24 stalls, and we turned it into an indoor arena, and it's our show barn.
You were kind of surprised to see Mr. Johnny Phelps pull up, weren't you?
Oh, you bet. You bet. I've wanted to meet him for a long time.
You've obviously read his books because you're a part of the Milky Way history.
Yes, I have. I have both his books.
Great.
Show them to everybody.
This is the mansion here on Milky Way Farm, presently owned by Linda Wagner. Mrs. Wagner and her husband Joe moved here in 1977. Unfortunately, her husband was killed in an accident on the farm in 1983. The mansion has been an object of curiosity for all these years up until about 2 years ago when Miss Linda opened up the mansion for tours, banquets, reunions, and weddings. Let's go take the tour of the Milky Way Mansion and meet Miss Linda.
Hello, Eddie. I welcome you and your viewers to Milky Way today.
Well, thank you. This
Come on
is Miss
in.
Linda, and she's going to take us on the tour.
This house was built in 1932, and it was built by a 5-cent candy bar. Mr. Mars, who came to this county late in the late 20s, was selling candy out of a suitcase when he first made candy. They say he was doing that when he came here, but by then he was already a multimillionaire. But he did come here and decide he wanted to buy some land, and so buy some land he did. He bought 2,785 acres of prime farmland, and he wanted to create his own farm. So he built over 30 big barns, 30 miles of white board fence, 25 or 30 workers' houses, and then he built a house on this site, and it burned. Not many people know what it looked like or that it even existed, but right away he built this house. And the thing that's so unusual about this house is that it is English Tudor right here in the middle of the South, and that it is so large. It has 21 bedrooms and 12 baths. I think he built it out of stone and stucco then because so that it would not be likely to burn again, and it has been standing all these years. Mr. Mars lived here with his second wife, and both his wives were named Ethel. And so he didn't have any trouble talking in his sleep at night. By the first Ethel, he had a son whose name is Forrest, and Forrest is about 90 years old, and he's still alive today. By the second Ethel, he had a daughter named Patty, and Patty was the one that lived here with various husbands and her children. And he put Forrest through school and put him into the business, but they didn't stay together. But later on, he did take the company back, and it's Forrest Mars and his grandchildren and children, which are Mars Incorporated today, and they're the second wealthiest family in the nation and the third in the world at the present time. So candy is sweet in more than one way.
Yes.
Now, unfortunately, Mr. Mars died only 2 years after he finished this house. He died in 1934, and then Mrs. Mars stayed on here, though, till 1945. In 1940, she had a Derby winner from here by the name of Galahadian. This is the 120th year of the Kentucky Derby, so that's not too bad for a farm.
No.
And they raised all sorts of animals. It was a fully working farm. In fact, at that time, it was one of the top 5 farms in the nation. Now, when Mrs. Mars left here, that was the last that the Mars family had anything to do with this grand old farm that their grandfather built. Since that time, this portion has been owned by about 7 or 8 people. When she left, she took all the furniture she wanted, and then someone else had an auction, so there's not a lot of original furniture. Although everything in this front hall is original, there's a piece in the dining room and quite a bit in the dining room and a piece in the living room. She also took him. He was buried up here on this hill above us, and she took him, mausoleum and all, back to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he was from. And that's one thing that explains the Tudor. In Minneapolis, they have a lot of English Tudor houses. So, come see my favorite room.
Wow. This is amazing.
I hear that quite a lot.
I bet you do. How large of a ceiling is this?
It's 30 feet to the center. They tell me it's quite high for an English Tudor, but I think he either did it to accommodate these stairways or to take some of the heat off in the south here. This is a chestnut beam which came out of an old man's grandfather's barn. And when we came here, these were the only 2 rooms we could live in at all. It was so run down through the years. But these rooms seem to be indestructible because they've never been redone. The woodwork has never been refinished, only dusted. And if you'll look at this stonework up here, you will not find a crack in the mortar. These men were largely uneducated during the Depression, but they were highly skilled craftsmen, and they cared about their work even when they were working for only 50 cents a day. They were very glad to get it. And Mr. Mars is credited with having saved Giles County during the Depression, and that most of the people would not have even survived had he not been here. Eddie, this is the most famous room in the house. Everyone has heard of this dining room table. If you'd like to, just take a little stroll around the dining room and look out. A little stroll. And look out the windows and look at this big table. It is 28 feet long and 12 feet wide. I had an old lady visit me some time ago and said she used to come with her daddy while he worked on it in the room. So I now do believe it was built in the room. It's built of solid oak. It comes apart in sections. It has been out of here before, many years ago. And it is, as I said, 28 feet long and 12 feet wide, and they say that it takes 6 men to lift one of the sections. They're not leaves, they're sections of table. Now, the chairs around the table I had made in Alabama to do what I'm doing today, which is weddings and banquets and luncheons. And the smaller chairs against the wall here, the captain's chairs, were what Mr. Mars was using when he had the table. This sideboard over here is an original piece, Eddie. I guess no one had any room for it in their house. It's so large. And then the carved table over here in the corner, it came from Europe.
Okay.
And it's supposed to be one of 2 like it ever made in the world.
Wow.
Eddie, everyone asked me about that broken beam up there. Obviously, it didn't happen right there. I only have a theory on this, but I do know that he used some of the lumber out of the burned house. And I believe that's one of the beams that was in the first house that he built. Now, if you'd like to, we'll go see the kitchen. It's the only room in the house that's been remodeled in all these years, and it was done in the 50s by a man named Puckett. I want you especially to see the call board that's between the doors.
Great.
Now, if you'd like to, you can just quickly walk around the kitchen. You can tell it was done in the 50s by the colors that's in it. But we use this kitchen to serve our luncheons and our banquets. Look at this call board between these doors here. It was wired throughout the walls in 1932. And every room and porch has a buzzer. And they could ring the buzzer, and then an arrow would come up out here, and the maid could go see what they wanted. Naturally, I don't do that, so I don't have it on. Now, Eddie, let's go back to the living room. This house is built for guests. That's the way Mr. Mars designed it, and it's really nice for that. On this side is the family side, both up and down, and the rooms are all different sizes and shapes. On this side is the guest wing with small rooms with just a bath between. Of course, there's 21 bedrooms to 12 baths, so not every room has a bathroom. Now, when Mr. Mars was here, he had his own railroad siding over here across the road, and he brought in carloads of cattle buyers and guests. And the housekeeper's daughter told me an interesting story. She said the day of the Derby, they were down here in the little office building and listening to it on radio. Of course, that's how you heard anything then, and they kept listening for their horse and listening and listening, and suddenly it said, Galahadian wins. And they had been calling that horse by the wrong name through the whole race, and they didn't even know if he was in it until he won. So that was one little bit of interesting folklore. That's true, probably. He did have a lot of guests here, but of course, when he died, only 2 years after, they didn't get to fulfill all of that dream. Let's go see some of those bedrooms he planned for guests. From now on, all the furniture is mine and the decorations, so it's not what Mr. Mars had. These halls are 10 feet wide, which is what makes the house look so spacious. And here's one of the main bedrooms in the house. I guess it's my favorite.
Oh, that's pretty.
Come on, Eddie, this house is laid out really nicely to tour. We can go straight through everywhere except the porch. Have you ever seen a bathroom this size?
Wow. Hey, look at that tub.
And all of these fixtures are original. Everything here but the decorations, even the built-in shower, which at that time no one had built-in showers in their homes, hardly. And most people around here had a bath with a bath. Oh, this bedroom in here now is used now as an office and combination sitting room, but this was at that time a bedroom. And the porch, everybody has to see this porch. The view is just lovely. Come see this porch.
Oh, this is a great view.
You will notice too, look at this floor. This is the original floor. There's not a crack in it. And look at the stonework here, how it has been preserved. They used materials that we just simply don't have today.
It lasts forever, doesn't it? It's a great view of a couple of the magnolia trees also.
That's true. Did you notice the arches everywhere, even on the doors in the rooms, and the arches out here? They're beautiful. Of course, they're hard to get repaired, too. Now, Eddie, let's go across the hall to another bedroom, which is my little gift shop. It's called the Forever Yours shop. If you buy it, it's forever yours. But that's a racehorse he used to have and a candy bar he made. So we have lots of local homemade crafts and Milky Way mugs and cars, and the tour buses love to have something to take home with them, so they come in here and shop for a while.
Now, did you make these crafts?
I made 98% of them.
Wow.
I keep busy.
I imagine.
By the way, did you notice this black bathroom in here? Those fixtures were there black in 1932, and that was really avant-garde then. Well, come on, Eddie. We have to move right along. We've only seen 4 bedrooms so far. Let's go upstairs and see the rest of the family wing.
Now, Linda, how many rooms did you tell me is in the mansion?
21 bedrooms, and we've only seen 4.
Wow.
Come on up the other side of the upstairs of the family side, and when you get up here now, be sure you look down and see where the brides come down the stairway, and they're usually married in front of this fireplace here. Again, you can see they're all different sizes and shapes. Look at these bathrooms. More built-in tubs. This tub even has a seat in it. These showers are quite modern. The only old-timey thing about them is that the shower comes right down on your head. This, I've been told, might have been Mr. Mars's dressing room. At that time, it would have been cedar. Two people have told me that he was colorblind, and they had all of his drawers marked for his socks and his shirts. So that could possibly be true. But when he had this house, it was all very, very dark and very masculine. They had big overstuffed furniture and leather and all of that. But I've tried to lighten it up a little bit. And so, as you can see in this room, every room has a good view.
Linda, that's interesting looking. What is that?
Everybody asks me, and I just tell them I'm a better decorator than I am a plasterer. Now, Ed, let's go see the best view in the house. This is the sunroom above the porch that we were on downstairs.
Oh, yes.
And when Mr. Mars was sick, they used to push him out here in his wheelchair. And he could see everything he owned, and he could even count his cows, because at that time, these trees were only waist high, because he had them all planted by a landscape architect. We're supposed to have the largest private stand of grand magnolias in the nation. I know there are at least 50. Eddie, Eddie, by the time we get to this bedroom, everybody decides they could live in a big bedroom like this. We can all get used to more space. It's hard to get used to less space. Actually, this is the same size as that gift shop downstairs, but it's just not filled with things. From here, you can really get a view of how big this bedroom is. You could put a whole family in here, not just 2 people. Ed, this was my son's room when we lived here. People either love it or they hate it. But it is patriotic.
Hey, here's, I don't know if we've got a shot of this, but one of the ringers.
Yeah, from the call buttons for the kitchen.
I said, did he ever call you, hey, Mom?
I turned it off a long time ago. So let's go now and see the guest side. The rooms there are small with just a bath between, but just a shower, actually, but showers were great luxury back in that time. No one had them. So his guests lived pretty well. The first room we're going into here is a cedar linen room. They had a whole room for their linens, and it was almost the size of a hotel, so they needed a lot of space for linens.
Look at them drawers.
And the housekeeper's daughter told me that they used Irish linen sheets and changed them every day. And you know, that means they had to iron them.
Well, there was a place for everything here, wasn't it?
Yes, there was. I use it now for tools so I can keep track of things, but it was used for linen. Unfortunately, all the linens from the house got away in one of the auctions. Now, Eddie, we're going into some of the bedrooms. You can go back to the kitchen this way, which makes it very nice for serving on the porch. This is one of the small bedrooms. I've just used it for sitting room right now. They're larger than they look, actually. They will hold a bed quite nicely. They're about 12 by 13. And as you can see, the bathrooms here have no tubs, just showers, and it comes down on the top of your head. You can see from this bedroom that they do hold a bed and a chest, and of course that's all the space a guest would need. As we go across the hall here, look out this door and you'll see a little house here. This is where the black chauffeur said that he lived, and some of the people who worked on the farm. They had 15 maids doing the work in this house alone, plus the housekeeper who lived in the house. The maids did not live in the house. I think this actually was the housekeeper's bedroom here, her daughter thought. And we're lucky that this house is built the way it is. Mr. Mars must have known I was going to tour it, because we can go right on through and we don't have to have a cord across the door like most places. Many people tell me they like this better than Biltmore. Of course, Biltmore is 10 times the size. But I think they say that because they could picture themselves living here, possibly, but never at Biltmore.
Miss Linda, what kind of material is this on the wall here?
Oh, it's stucco. Throughout most of the house, wherever it wasn't stucco, I papered because I like paper. But it's on a heavy metal lathe, and it is real, real thick stuff. And you just can't get stucco like this today. Eddie, this is the hall that really makes this look like an old hotel, don't you think?
Oh, yes.
Well, now I'm going to let you and the viewers do the same thing I let all the tourists do, and they love this part. And that's to go up the stairway here to 8 rooms that are original, how the house was when we got it. When we first bought this place, there was not a room we could unpack a suitcase in, and we just started and cleaned and papered. And so you may see, and then you'll be proud of me.
Well, let's go see what it was like. As we started walking through the rooms, we could hear Miss Linda playing the Tennessee Waltz, just as she does for her tour groups. The mansion is 20,000 square feet, and legend has it that it took 300 men 6 months to build. Again, tell us about the services you offer here.
Well, I do mostly tour groups and buses and luncheons and dinners, or professional dinners or weddings. For $100, you can come and get married in the living room. Nothing extra, but you can come get married, and you can buy a book about the place, and you can take beautiful pictures. And then, of course, you could have a reception for up to 500 people.
Well, it is a beautiful place, as you mentioned, and you might want to tell us exactly how you get here.
Well, I'm located about 9 miles north of the Pulaski Square, right on Highway 31. I'm 20 miles south of Columbia on Highway 31. And you can just come Highway 31 and turn into the Milky Way Farm and come up to the Manor House. But don't do that unless you call me first, because I do everything by appointment. And my phone number is 615-363-6919. And my address is 1864 Milky Way Road, of course, Pulaski, Tennessee, 38478. Y'all come.
Miss Linda, we can't tell you what a pleasure it's been to tour the Milky Way Mansion. We appreciate you giving us this tour and telling us all about the mansion.
Thank you.
The history and significance of the Milky Way Farm to this area is as rich as the candy bar it's named after. That's our 50-cent tour of the Milky Way Farm, then and now. We hope you enjoyed it.